I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Joining us today is Scott Giordano, VP of Data Protection at Spirion, and Frank Dean, our Senior Solutions Engineer. Scott?
Wonderful, wonderful. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Let's go to the next slide, and let's get started here. Okay, so that's us. Let's go to the next slide. We only have 30 minutes here, so here's how we're going to divide it up. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about the challenges of building a data inventory and about the CCPA's definition of personal information. The rest of the time is going to be devoted to Frank's presentation of how you do this hands-on, hence the name hands-on. And yes, a copy of this will be made available. Also, there are bonus slides on this that I will not be going over, but I will be sharing with you. Also, please fill out at the end of this the review and give us ideas as to things you'd like to see in the future. So without further ado, let's talk about building a data inventory. And let's go to the next slide. If you see, you've probably seen this before if you've been on any of my presentations, either on the webinars or in person. In the red box is some different data elements or data types that are considered personal data under GDPR. This is a document that I built before I joined Spirion. It took a long time, about a month worth of work to go and get this whole thing. It was a massive document. And so it had every single kind of system that the client had that generated or touched personal data. So this is a real document. I've changed the names to protect the innocent, but this is the real deal. So this is a sample data inventory, and here's the problems, though, with developing this. I'm going to share with you my experience. If you go to the next slide, a couple things. One is that when you interview the application owners, and I use air quotes here that you can't see, application owners, that could be someone who's technically responsible for the application. Maybe it's HR application, or maybe it's a business owner, okay? Whereas a business analyst, it's assisting the business owner, but whoever it is, there's usually at least two people that touch an application and have some connection to the personal data that's being processed. Problem is that a lot of times folks cycle through organizations, they don't make notes or records of what personal data is being processed, or never really dug too deeply into it for whatever reason. So there's really not a lot of good tribal knowledge or institutional knowledge as to what exactly is being processed. So a lot of times we're just taking guesses. I mean, some things are easy, some things can be very elusive. So that's the problem with data owner or app owner interviews. There's really three big buckets of personal data, at least based on my experience. One is the regular stuff that we're all familiar with. So social security numbers, driver's license numbers, phone numbers, et cetera, et cetera. That's not terribly a challenge. I mean, we know to look for these things. Then you have machine readable data. This can be very, very difficult because there's so many things that can identify you with just very simple cross-referencing. So you've got IP and MAC addresses. You have the mobile device identifiers like the IMEI and the MC numbers and so forth. Log files, that's chock full of personal information, cookies, etc. And then you've got the special personal data, at least as far as the EU considers it. California has its own version of special data. I'll go on in a minute. But the net of it is these are things that are very loosey-goosey. If someone was putting in an email or an IM or on Slack or something, hey, I've got an appointment with my oncologist today. Well, that's healthcare. Flat out. And the question is, well, how do you find that? How do you track that? How do you find documentation that might even contain that? It's not just necessarily going to be in an HR system, for example. It could be in other places as well. So that's, again, a challenge that has to be worked through, and this is part of the challenge of building a data inventory. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about CCPAs. And again, if you've been on my presentations before, you've seen this, so forgive me if you've seen it more than once. What you're going to find about, and I'm being a little bit cynical here, but not much, is that CCPA defines just about anything that can identify you as personal data, as we'll see here. They even updated the law with an amendment that happened about 9 or so months ago that really didn't help things at all. It just made things, in fact, more complicated. And that's the area in blue here, which really just restates what was already stated. If you go to the next slide, I'll give you some examples of things that are cited as personal information. Some make sense, like unique identifiers, online identifiers. So a unique personal identifier could be your AD credentials, for example. They don't come out and say that, but that could be very well it. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that you have all kinds of stuff. And this was copied and pasted from another section in the California Code, which deals with breach notification, which is, by the way, not part of CCPA. That's a whole other story. further webcasts. But here you can see things like physical characteristics, your education, your employment history, etc. That's all personal information. If we go to the next slide, it gets better or worse if you're having to build that inventory. So you've got protected classifications. What they mean is protected classes. So under Title VII or the California equivalent. Commercial information, so your personal property records. If you bought something on eBay or Amazon or what have you, that's all personal information. Your browsing history, your search history, interacting with an advertisement, you don't have to buy anything. So just having that interaction is personal data. And it gets better. If you go to the next slide, you will find that audio, electronic, olfactory information, so how you smell, that is presumably personal information. Inferences, that's personal information. So the net of it is just about anything is personal information. So then that raises the question, well, how do you find this? How do you do so effectively in a way that's repeatable, it's defensible, so that if things do go south, you can show that you gave the due diligence, the due care to go and find this in the first place? And so Frank's gonna answer that question. And Frank, I'm gonna shift over to you. Also, folks, if you have questions, send them in. If we do not get to you, we'll get back to you on email. Just make sure you include your email. So Frank, we're going to shift over to you whenever you have an opportunity.
All right, thanks, Scott. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and take you guys through just a couple of slides. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yeah.
So really, Spirion can help around CCPA because of an accurate discovery, classification, location of PII information in the structured and unstructured data sets. We can help with the data flow, the accountability, the auditing, and then also we integrate with a lot of the security systems that you already have in place. So we're not reinventing what you already have, we're just enhancing what you have. So certainly this is what we're here to talk about. I'm going to move past that. Another thing to get past is the amount of data that you have in your environment and the amount of areas that we're getting into. And I just showed this mostly to give you guys an idea of the data areas that we can get into and the types of data that we can touch. Showing you this quickly, the top band is going to show you what we do out of the box. There's more to it than just that, but those are the easy ones to hit that a lot of people are looking for. We can add things like keywords, regexes, dictionaries, along with those items that are there. The next band talks about, again, the areas that we can get into, and it's not the whole list. It certainly would be a lot longer than a few slides to go through. The next item talks about the things that we can do around the remediation piece for you. So that's going to be that shredding, that scrubbing, quarantining, classifying. We can even assign this to people and show what it's going to look like as far as getting people to manage that data for you. And then, as Scott said, everything is going to get classified into buckets when we look at it. So this is just giving you an idea of a quick overview. Typically, when we work with people, when they start out, they're looking at typically 4 different buckets, and these are typically the buckets that they would have. With our system, we certainly can go much deeper or much wider and give you any types of classifications that you want to do, but this just gives you a brief overview. Taking a look at our system itself, this is our console. And so when we look at the console, this gives you a lot of information in one snapshot. And so we'll start at the very top, and what this does is this shows you the information that's come into our system over a period of time, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit further. The next area here, we talk about our sensitive footprint. And so when we would turn this on in a customer's environment, you would see it like you see down here, where we're going to go after a little bit of data. We're going to validate and verify with your teams and find out what we're gathering is what you want to see. We'll open it up to another area. And during this time, you're usually training your people around what we're doing and what those bucketizations look like. And then you're going to open it up to users, and we're going to start doing some end user experience, which I'll touch on as we get near the end. We open it up again and again, and finally we get to the top of your data. Well, what's happened with this green area that you see here, this is typically when your users are helping you do some stuff, but as everybody knows, the users only go so far, and you can't keep ahead of the amount of data that's building. So that's when you would see us turn on that automation piece, when we start automating what we found and what we do. And that's where you see us drastically drop off. So another piece of information you can look at is this green area is then reflected by this widget, which talks about how we've protected that sensitive data. So as we find sensitive data, we talk about what did we do with it. And we can show you here what we've done with the 55,000 items we found out of 56,000 that's shown here on the left screen. And the sensitive data at the bottom, the second widget to the right, is the protected sensitive data area that we're talking about. Then we would move to the right, and that's where we classify the data. This is your actual classifications, which would be that bucketized list we talk about. When we present it in this screen, you're always going to see the top 5. When you guys do it in your environment, these certainly could be different based on what those classifications are. So then I'm going to move over and I'm going to talk about the sensitive data heat map. When you look at this, this is going to be based on your AD environment, your users and groups, or you can do it based on the repositories that you have. The way that I'm showing it here, it's based on the users and groups. And so what we do is we look at the largest bubble is the one that shows you which has the most amount of data. So we're going to drill into that and kind of show you what that looks like. And as you notice, the rest of the screens are all going to refresh based on where we are in the sensitive data heat map. So our protected data is going to be reduced because we're targeting a smaller subset. And then as we drill in further, we're going to get down to more of the machine level inside of this group. And when this bubble comes up, I'll show you what we're going to talk about, and then we'll kind of drill in a little further for you. So what we have here is going to be some of the individual machines that are in the executive group. And the Henry machine, when we look at it here, this machine is one that we use and we hand out to people that would be using it as a backup laptop or something like that. So we're going to drill into that because it's got the most amount of data, which would be expected if we're handing that out to multiple people. So we're going to have multiple AD users on this machine when we get into the bubble to show you what that looks like. And so now we see these are the users, the actual AD users that log into that machine, and the MacArthur user is the one with the most amount of data. So we're going to go ahead and target him. And what this is going to do is give you the ability to look at this machine. And when we see these larger amounts of data, this is when the data is being probably copied onto the machine when he got it, when he was using it. And you can see that he's bringing sensitive data onto that machine based on the scope that we've already set. As he does it, we start looking at it, we start going through and classifying it and doing some other things with it to protect it. So by the time he hands it back in, we've already protected all of that data. When we move over to our results screen, this is what the results screen is going to look like for you. You can see the MacArthur is what we have here, and we start showing you what these matches look like. And we give you an icon view of it along with what did we find, how many times did we find it, also what locations did we find it in. So if you find it on the C drive, we know that they were on the machine. If it's on the N drive, it was a share probably that they were getting to, or a V drive is probably a share again. We talked about that we protected some of the sensitive data. So what did we do? If we look over here, we might have shredded something because it wasn't supposed to be put on the C drive on that laptop. We may have gone and restricted access because, again, of where it was put. We may have quarantined something and moved it to a safe area. We also have classifications, and we can do multiple classifications or single classifications. And again, you look at the bucketizing and the colors. This is very easy for your users to understand when we start doing it at the end user experience. So that's going to give you a real good idea of how we take care of that information. When we move to our policy, our workflow area, this would be what we talk about with CCPA. So we built out a critical rule. Critical rule is around CCPA. We went and put what did it talk about, or what is it covering, and we talk about some of the items that we're trying to find for CCPA. And then we would define it with our definitions, and we build out a definition, which is very similar to what you guys might have done in the past around antivirus definition, something like that, but we're building out very similar. We also look at the create date, and we can add some other things in here like last modified, so on and so forth. We would go back, and knowing that we're going to have to do that 12-month look back, we could put 12 months in here for our first scan through and make sure that we're covering even past the 12 months right now, just for safety's sake. But again, you can set that for anything you want, and we would just switch this to months and then set your 12. For actions, what we can do is we classified it based on the critical, and then we have either directly on the endpoint, which is going to show you what your end users are going to see, and I'll show you that momentarily. And then we can perform actions. And the actions are really nice because some of the things you can do is quarantine. So if you were to find some of this data in areas where it shouldn't be, you can quarantine it. You can do some further things with assign and notification, and I'll show you that. We can shred it if we want to. We can do a redaction, and this would be typical of when you do account numbers or credit card numbers on your statements. The way that you would see it is most of it has been blanked out with some sort of character, and then it just shows you a couple so you can be identified with the last couple of characters. we have the ability to do it with any character you select and however many spots that you want to redact. We can execute scripts, so if you wanted to do something that we can't do, we can come in here and we can do batch or PowerShell scripts. A good example of this is if you wanted to do some sort of keyed encryption so that you can send data from one site to another site and not have to worry about it going across the wire, not using a VPN, something like that. You could call a third-party keyed encryption tool and then be able to unencrypt on the other side. We are also able to go in and do restriction of access. So restriction of access is going to be based on our endpoints. The endpoints that we have right now for our system is going to be Windows, Mac, and Enterprise Red Hat Linux. And those agents need to be in the environment. They don't need to sit on top of every item that you have, but they certainly would be valuable to have on the end user machines. And then for any of the machines that you have, like database servers, file servers, those, we can have those agents search them remotely, so they don't need to sit on top of them and add any overhead to them, even though we have a very light agent. We can do remote searches, so we credential against those, whether it be a database or a file share or anything like that. We just credential against it. Then we would go and do the scans, and then we would be able to do whatever actions that we have been talking about higher up. And then for Windows and Mac, we can just take care of the users or the groups. So once we do it, let's say we're going to quarantine that data because it's in an area we don't want it, and we want to put it somewhere where it's safe so we can take care of it. The next thing would be, a lot of times the IT department is concerned that when they run a tool like this, the burden falls entirely on them. That's not the case with us. What we would do is we would move over here and we would set up a council role. And so let's say it's somebody specific to CCPA data around users, and we're going to have a group that's going to take care of what that might be. We would set up a group in here, then that information would be assigned to them, and then when they would go to the results tab that we have, they would only see what they would need to be responsible for. When we move to the notification tab, we are able to notify those people that we found something with an email. So we would set the assignee, so we don't have to select anybody else. We've already built that. We would create whatever our subject line is, and then we would move into the body. And with our system, we have everything based on HTML, so we're able to use variables from our tool. So when you send this email to the assignee, it can say something like, we found information that we feel needs to be looked at a more high level for CCPA information. We've quarantined it to this area. Can you please go look at the 25 files we found? Then please report to whomever it might be. Then you could add that email address here, add email address, and put an additional email address at the top. And then everybody involved would know what they're getting from the email, what's expected from them, and where the information is. Going back to the results tab, just so that you can see what that would look like when we come in here. When we select an item, that would be one of the items that may have been found. What happens is, as you click on one of these items, we are able to light up additional things across the top that then they can take action right from the council to do. Right now, these are already shredded, so they're already gone, but should we have data that they could use, it lights up additional things. Here we could do a redact, you could reclassify, you could do an ignore if it's something that you're not concerned about. And if you look out to the right, you can see, again, we have those classifications there. So I'm gonna move over.
Frank, sorry,
Yeah.
we actually have a question. Referring back to the spyglass screen.
Yes.
How do you search for data and how do you track it? Now, you may have already covered that a little bit, but maybe you want to get more in depth.
Sure. So how do you search for data? So if you were trying to find something specific like keywords or things like that, you would build out a rule set around how to find it. And then when we got to the policies that I had showed you in the workflow, then that would be how you kind of define it. So when we talk about it here, and then we set up our definition, the data type is built in a different screen where we call out all the different data types that we're trying to find, and then it just becomes one item, one line item here. There's another screen that we have that's a much deeper screen to get into, so I didn't want to cover it in an area like this, but we have an area that we would build out all those specific things, and then you would add in however many of them you want. Here's an example of a dictionary versus some other things that are here.
Great, thanks.
So when we talk about our end user experience, what I wanted to show you guys here is, again, bringing back the slide that we talked about with that bucketized list. you look at what some of these things are and what they fall into, and you can kind of see what we do here with them. What I wanted to show you here is that we have the ability to...
Frank, I have another question for you.
Yep, go ahead.
Do you need to install an agent on all the endpoints to be able to scan them?
The answer is no. We only need to install the agents in areas that would be strategically placed, and that would be handled by our professional services team when they would scope the environment. So if they found out that you guys had a large amount of file shares that we needed to get through, they would determine how many agents we would need to go after that in a reasonable amount of time so that you guys would be able to get through all of that data. But we don't need to have an agent on every device, and that leads into another question about licensing. The nice thing about the way that we license is we license by a knowledge user. So that's typically people that have access to data, not necessarily that they own the data, but we don't care which modules or which plugins or what additional items you use in our system. We don't care if you're on Box, Dropbox, O365, any of those type of things. Our licensing is straightforward. It's one price. Everything is included for us. And then when we do our professional services, they're the ones that help you implement this. It's usually typically over a 7 to 14 week period, depending on how large the environment is, where they partner with you over that period of time. Coming back to the bubbles that I was talking about, you can see here that we've got different ones here, and it's so that the users can understand how to handle and manage that data that they found. So again, they could right click on one of these items and they can come down and they can look and they can do a couple of things here, but we can also look at what the classifications are for the different items. And if they wanted to reclassify, they can, if you give them permission. If we don't give the users permission because we don't trust the users, they may reclassify it, but when the system rescans, it's going to put the original classification back on it. They would need to let somebody know why they think it should be reclassed. And then once it's reclassed, the workflow rule would be changed to take that into account.
Frank, do you integrate with all Azure information protection?
We do. We can read their tags. We can add additional tags. We can go into areas that the AIP, MIP solutions can't go into. We also offer an OCR that's shown here with the PDFs that we have here. So if you look at PDFs, we can do pictures, we can do PDFs, things of that nature. We can also, we just released it, we can do handwriting. So we're starting to get into doctors and lawyers. That is in release 1.0, so it's still being refined, but we can do some remediary things around handwriting for pictures.
Thank you.
So one of the other things we do, and my system was acting a little weird earlier, but I'm gonna kind of give you an example of, we also do a little bit of a DLP or actually some protection. So the example here would be if you had some data that was on your HR share and somebody on Friday afternoon decided that they'd like to take this information with them and they want to copy it, and we're saying that these files are classified, but they decide anyhow they're going to move them over here and they're going to go ahead and paste them on their laptop and they're going to take them home with them and they're going to do work. We've got something called File Watch. It's a tool that will watch an area to see if information is put there, and it can do a couple of things. One, it can take some actions like I showed you on our Actions tab, or it can classify as soon as something's there. Now, I know that over the internet it's a little slow to see, but if you look on the left, you can see that I had 3 files that had the blue icons on it. When we move to the right now, you can see that there's 1 folder and then there's 3 that are now text files. What we did with that is we went and quarantined them off and we put them in a different location for safekeeping. And then we put this note behind so that they could see it. The important part is here that we can customize this note to say anything you want. We may have quarantined this because it might have been against some of the legislation for a specific state. It could be because they're putting it in a location it shouldn't go. Whatever the rule is, we can make this file read that so they know why. And then the administrator is also notified that this has happened so they can educate the user. Talking about what we can do around why we want the endpoint on the workstations is, this is one of the reasons right here. So we've got a bunch of loans in here. We've got some social security numbers. So you can see that we did a social security classification here. And again, you could classify from inside the doc if you wanted to, or this is showing it to you from a classification that's already happened. We can take it one step further And you may have somebody that wants to email something from your location out. So maybe they take and copy this file and they go to paste it into an email. And when they do,
sorry, Frank, I
they
have a
get a
question. When you have a chance.
Okay, I'm almost done here.
Okay, take your time.
And so what we do is we give them a notification. We don't stop them from doing it, but we tell them that they need to accept this policy that it may violate. And that way, again, we're auditing that tracking to let you guys know that if something's being handled that way, that you guys know about it. What's the question, Shane?
To go back to the notification, will that notification also work for USB drives and FTP transfers?
So we can only look at the location where it's going to be. So we can do USBs, but we can't do the FTP. What you would do is these classifications have GUIDs plugged into the metadata of the file. And so you would plug this into the security ecosystem that I had talked about back on the slide deck. And so like a DLP, next gen firewall, any of those type of things, you would plug in the GUID. So understanding when we looked at the different picture where it showed the bucketized list, if it's a critical or a red type of instance, then you would plug that into the DLP and say, this cannot leave our environment for any reason. The DLP would do your blocking and tackling for you, as opposed to the way it was done in the past where the DLPs needed to find the information, then do the blocking and tackling, and they weren't very efficient at it. We currently run at about a 2% false positive, and we've got customers that are running even less than that in false positives of the information that they're trying to find. And that takes us about to the bottom half of the hour. Are there any other questions, Shane?
Nope, I think that's it. Thank you.
Frank, are we just about done here? Or do you want to, okay, I just want to make sure because we've got about a minute left and I want to make sure that we're being respectful of everyone's time.
Yep, that's what I have for my side. So again, if there's any questions, go ahead and pass them to Shane and we'll field them for you.
Scott, I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. In that case, then, I think we should be, if there's no questions, we've got about a minute left. Let's go over to the final slide. And so this is our CCPA white paper. If you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at it, please do. You can go to our website to do so. If there were questions and you didn't get a chance to ask them, feel free again to send us an email and we'll be happy to get to them. And also please fill out the review and that way we have an idea of what you'd like to see in the upcoming webinars. Was there a question?
Yep, actually I've got a couple that just came in. So what do you do with the files that aren't supported by meta properties, that do not support meta properties? Frank, I think that's for you.
Yeah, that's for me, and I'd have to understand because we write it into the header of the file, so we're going to open up whatever's in the meta file for the data stream. So I would have to understand what kind of file they'd be speaking of, because from the files that we can get into and we can interrogate, anything that's writable where we would have data in it, we should be able to interrogate. We use iFilters along with...
He has an example, source code.
Yeah, so it depends how source code is kept. And if you're looking for like intellectual property, we should still be able to get into source code and find things based on source code. And I've worked with some of the development companies for software, and we've done some of that with them where we've looked at some source code that they've got and they wanted to protect it. And so we were able to do it again with that metadata, but I'm not sure how it would be saved that we wouldn't be able to see it. So I guess maybe if you want to get his email address, I could communicate with him offline and we can handle that.
Yeah. And then how do you demonstrate due diligence?
So we can report out from what we found. Again, the first thing that you're going to want to do with CCPA is you need to create an inventory of where your data is, what data you have. And so that would be the first part you'd want to do. And then you could take a snapshot of what that data looks like. And then Scott, do you have anything that you can add a little further around the due diligence?
Really showing your homework, for lack of a better word, being able to develop reports to show and take snapshots reports as you progress through your data protection program and show all the efforts that you've put in. Because if it's challenged in court for whatever reason by a business partner, regulatory authority, they're going to want to see that you've done your due diligence, and reports are the best way, especially reports that perhaps are color-coded and are easy to parse by a judge. That's really going to win the day for you.
All right, we don't have any more questions, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation and a link to the recorded webinar will be provided via email in the next coming days. And we hope to see you guys in any of our future webinars. Thanks. Bye.